Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Myth and Meaning. I'm your host on the left, Owl,
I'm your host on the right, Brok.
and this is the show where we further dissect and condense the mythological significance of fictional works. Today, we're talking about Dragon Ball, as usual. And in episode 11, we're specifically talking about how the truth, the spoken word, is good.
It is very good. This image that I got here for our intro, I wanted to find something that was representative of the spoken word in reference to the creation of all things. And there are a lot of different representations of it. We have it throughout this episode too. But I wanted to just kick it off here with a quick reading from John chapter 1. Because today we're going to be talking about the power of the word and the significance of the spoken word and the categorization that comes from words. John 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." So I think that's a good representation of the enlightenment that comes
Right.
with the speaking of truth.
And it's not just in the Christian mythology that happens.
Yeah, I think it's a universal archetypal representation.
That the spoken word, Marduk, for example, spoke magical words, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so it's not just the Christian tradition, but I am glad you cited some primary sources for this episode. Any clue to what's going on here in this picture? You don't remember? All right, we'll just go on to the next zany one then. This craziness. So at the top we have kind of exactly what Brok was talking about, God speaking forth and creating things. And
I think we should say specifically what we mean by that
good.
too.
And it's the designation of classification and categorization. That instinct that humans have, that is a good thing.
Right. You could say it's an aspect of the logos. It's a logical process for us to want to define things as a category and then be able to, I don't want to say control, but to understand and put it into a box, so to speak.
It's to forthrightly identify what you encounter, right?
Mm-hmm.
What one encounters. What about the creation of Adam there, right? This is the light being transmuted from God to Adam.
Literally from his mouth, right?
Right, and that is because that is the divine essence that is creation, and that's what God does in the beginning of Genesis. Is he is defining the boundaries of man.
Right, and then he passes it on to Adam to continue the work of defining the boundaries of all of the earthly creatures and all of the, basically everything earthly.
Right, and I mean by bounds of man, like Earth, for example,
mm-hmm.
a bound of man, and that's what he does. He makes the stars and all that too, right?
Right. Well, it's that classical separation of the heavens and earth, right? The separation of the cosmic parents, and so then it's sort of the logos through Adam then needs to be able to speak the names of things, to give them an essence, sort of that ontological essence, right?
Right. And what is Goku doing here?
It's not dissimilar. The Kamehameha is basically the impetus for us talking about the spoken word and truth in this episode, because he is going to be learning it from Roshi. And so it's something that he can get from sort of the spiritual father essence that Roshi has with him. And so Roshi doesn't think that Goku can learn it all that quickly, and Goku picks it up immediately because of the nature of his character, the nature of the archetype that he's representing. So I wanted to get a quick picture of the Kamehameha here, because that is, whenever they're using the Kamehameha, it is a representation of the power of speaking the truth.
Right. And they have to say the words. There are some attacks and beams and stuff that are used, like the garlic gun, for example,
Garlic
that
powder.
don't exactly have to be shouted out to be used. Like Frieza, I don't think ever shouts out anything. Right.
No.
But the reason that the Kamehameha, and it's so significant and kids repeat it all the time, is because it is bringing light, bringing truth to that, to what you're aiming at.
Yeah, it's the act of speaking reality, right? Of through your pneuma creating a representation of reality out of yourself, and the power of doing that.
Right. And so this kind of brings us to that's the kind of intro to the episode, I think, because we're going to get into the actual events now. And so here we have the impetus. We have Goku and Chi-Chi. They're flying to go see Master Roshi. And this is the joining of the masculine and the feminine, which awakens the spiritual father, which is happening in the top right-hand corner. You have the this is kind of, and I haven't really talked about the Wizard of Oz too much, but the Wizard of Oz is kind of the reverse of Sleeping Beauty, because you have Dorothy is more like Prince Philip, but she needs to be guided by the three masculine spirits that represent the Logos all put together.
Mm-hmm.
And she has to do that, and she has to actually go, that the Logos has to go rescue her in the story, right? And the spiritual father is here. You can see he's the Wizard of Oz, but he's the man behind the curtain. He's the one that gets Dorothy home.
Right, and what does a wizard do, right? Something associated with a wizard
Speaks
is
magical words, right? In this film, she speaks magical words to get home.
Exactly.
Right.
And she learns to do that from the wizard.
Right, but the wizard is also exiled, right? The wizard is the only other human in Oz.
Kind of like Master Roshi, right?
Kind of like Master Roshi in exile, right? And I put the picture here of the Lion King is because this is the joining of the masculine and the feminine that is going to summon forth the spiritual father at the end of that scene, when the rain starts coming down and Simba roars and he says, "Remember," right? But I wanted to get a picture of Nala. She's not actually in any of those scenes.
Well, it's also significant, too, because Simba sees his father in the water through his own reflection, right? And that's...
Yeah, and then he sees him in the sky here when he roars there. He has that spiritual father.
That's the connection of the lower and higher masculine principles, right? Looking down into the water to see the reflection in the unconscious, and then seeing the logos of the father in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can connect that similarly, not exactly the same, but with the delineation between the lower masculine principle with Roshi and the higher with Ox King.
But hold on, because when does Simba see his father in the water? What is the impetus for that?
I don't remember exactly what the setup is.
I guess the song, "Can You Feel the Love Tonight," happens with Nala.
Is it immediately following that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
Well, she wants him to accept his responsibility, and he abandons it, and that's when he sees his father.
Right. Well, it's all about the concept
After he meets the spiritual father of Rafiki, they have to merge first. As in Dorothy and the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion. And here we see that Goku and Chi-Chi have bonded, and that they are going to awaken the spiritual father, just like the two examples above. It's the same archetype. And so here it is. And so they go to Roshi's island, and Chi-Chi thinks that only Master Roshi could dodge this attack, and she throws that at him. And it's funny it hits. I'm curious to hear your analysis, if any, on this.
Well, I think it ties more into him being the blind father as part of why it hits Roshi. Now, I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about the archetype of the blind father and what it means truly to be blind. I'm stealing this directly from Eric Neumann, but the idea of the rejection of your own sight is analogous with the rejection of the logos. And that's to say that you are sort of retreating into a space away from the higher masculine principle. And that ties into Osiris quite a bit, with Osiris being that lower masculine principle that has to meet up with, let's say, Ra to form the pure masculine principle. And so Roshi does not have, let's say, the sight. He doesn't have the logos to be able to stand up to something as pure as Chi-Chi, as pure as the expression of the potential of the societal daughter. It overcomes him.
See, I interpreted it differently because, he tries to block with his stick, right? That shamanistic tool, and it's able to go through it. And I think the only reason it is able to is because it's the presence of the masculine and the feminine, the familial unit potentially, and the awareness of the generational need that is what Roshi can't miss. He can't block it. He can't ignore it. It's staring him right in the face. It's not so much that his spirit is going against Chi-Chi's.
Well, let me delineate what I was saying, and maybe it'll line up with what you're saying. The rejection of the logos means that he is potentially the king who would have a domain. Roshi is in that position where he should be actually taking what he knows, the power of his moral wisdom, and applying it to society. But he has rejected the logos, and he stepped away from that responsibility. He stepped away from respecting that, and because of that, of course, it's like he is beneath this, right? He has not been tending to that aspect of himself. And if he had not become, let's say, the blind king, he instead would be, well, a king archetype, someone begetting his wisdom and knowledge down to the next generation. But since he hasn't, this is something that is a weak spot for him.
It's really...
Not saying that Roshi should be a king, but embodying the blind king archetype makes him weak to something like the societal daughter.
Yeah, but he's the blind spiritual king.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. It's more complicated than just the blind king.
Right, but that's what I'm trying to explain, is that the blind spiritual father, right, is awakened and called forth by generational need.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said, he can't avoid it. He can't deny it. Right. And it actually, it scars him.
It literally embeds itself into his head.
This instantiates his next instance that we see him, where he is more willing to accept a position of kingship, let's say.
Responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we'll talk about that next season. I do briefly want to talk about Yoda here, though. Yoda is another blind king. If you blind spiritual king. And specifically, he is called forth in the prequels by the joining of Padme and Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike Roshi, like, he is able to blind himself to it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Deeply flawed there. And so then we translate that into the new series. And in the new series, he actually does not come back to society, because there is no generational need that comes to him. It's just Luke.
It's just the archetypal hero.
Right. That's why I don't really like Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, Yoda is not approached with sort of a Luke Leia dichotomy that he needs to reconcile there at the beginning, whereas this is happening in the first season of Dragon Ball. It's sort of, let's escalate this immediately, yeah.
And immediately the spiritual father is called forth to re-enter into the world and let his wisdom be known. And especially give that wisdom to the Logos. That's the important part.
Right, and how does he give that wisdom to the Logos?
By showing him this, the Kamehameha, which is just that divine spark, and we have that lightning, that spark right there.
Mm-hmm.
I put that taxonomy because it is classifying things, naming things, delineating differences between things is good. The truth of that is good.
Right. So just to take it outside of just the creation myth, now this is man naming things. This is the effect that man can do through the power of speaking truth, right? And you can see, like, I love Peterson's analysis of what's going on with Moses whenever he does talk about it, and it sort of talks about, like, these are all rules that people were already enacting and that they knew they needed to act out in order to keep their society alive and perpetuating. But the act of naming what those rules were, naming what would keep them within the bounds of, well, you could say, civilized society, right? That is an act of the Logos. And you can see that represented with the tablets here and the lightning coming down.
Yeah,
representing
actually,
that.
I almost regret not putting like Hammurabi's Code of Laws on this page. But there's just so much. There's so much.
This
good.
is such a universal.
It's so universally good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Goku's mainstay becomes in the entire series, is that the truth is good.
It's a first principle.
Yeah, it's an axiom by which he can always rely. And in fact he does. As far as into Super, in fact, even though we don't like Super, like the fact that he still uses the Kamehameha wave is significant.
Yeah, he always uses it. I mean, it's not like, what's the strongest move? I just use that move. It's not like he's constantly trying to use a spirit bomb. It's not like.
But that's the thing. The Kamehameha wave is one of the strongest things that can exist. The power of the spoken word is one of the most powerful things that exists.
Well, the power of the spoken word, I mentioned the Pneuma before, but this is like, what do you do with your spirit, right? As far as like the archetypal expression of breath.
Well, we're not going to talk about the Genki Dama. You shouldn't even bring it up yet.
Well,
we'll all right.
There.
So then we see, Roshi does come back. The spiritual father comes back and uses the truth to do what?
Well, he doesn't extinguish the fire, which we had talked a bit before.
He does.
Well, he doesn't just extinguish the fire,
I
should say.
Yeah.
Because, he does not have the Bancho fan, which is a result of him being the blind king and rejecting the Logos and all of that, right?
Is it a rejection of the Logos?
It's not a literal rejection of the Logos, but the willful blindness is synonymous with the rejection of the responsibility of the Logos.
I feel like it's a failure of integration of the female spirit.
Partially. It is also associated with the loss of the battle with the terrible mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see that with things like Oedipus. But it's more abstract through that.
Okay, let's stay on task though.
But anyway, I wanted to point out that it's necessary that he destroys it rather than having the Bancho fan to put it out because of that. Because he's not integrated, right? So the truth that he can speak is a form of the lower masculine principle, one of destruction.
Okay.
And we know that the Bancho fan is...
I mean, yes, the Bancho fan could have put the flames out, but I want to focus more about how it is specifically the spoken word and the truth that leads to the destruction and rebirth of society.
Right.
But it has to be destroyed first either way. Knowing historically what we do, I think that's actually instantiated.
I mean, this is a pattern throughout history.
Right, but the spoken word is what does that, right? Those corrupt societies are toppled by the spoken word.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, think about the toppling of the church.
Well, the thing is that he doesn't send for Roshi to solve it with the spoken word, right? He sends for Roshi to put the masculine and feminine where they belong in society.
He sends the masculine and feminine to retrieve the Bancho fan.
Exactly, but since Roshi does not have it,
yes,
then he instead uses the spoken word to topple society.
Yes.
And
that is because at their potential right now, the society's daughter, let's say, the archetypal daughter, and the Logos aren't yet ready to take on the responsibility. And it is, I think, it's not discouraging. The story of Dragon Ball is not discouraging because it takes you one step at a time through these hierarchies. It doesn't say you have to take responsibility all at once.
Yeah, well, it's not saying like Goku, you need to take the responsibility of the entire like civilized hierarchy
It's
right now.
time for you to take responsibility for the sins of your ancestors.
No, it's time to take responsibility for your words.
See, that is hierarchy far beyond right now.
Right.
So, I think this brings us kind of to the end pretty neatly. This was a pretty tight episode. The truth is good, and that's encapsulated throughout all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, at the end of this episode, Goku witnesses Roshi use the Kamehameha, which topples the mountain, right? And then it's okay for the Ox King. He says, "Don't worry about it. We can always build a new one." You know, which is as the Logos, right, as representing that societal Logos. He recognizes the good in this situation, right?
And Goku does also use it.
And then Goku immediately figures out how to use the Kamehameha, surprising Roshi, surprising everybody, and that is the whole theme of it.
It's kind of a if we want to put it in Petersonian terms, he says that people aren't ready to speak the truth at first. They first need to not lie. Goku's already not lying. He is ready to speak the truth.
Right, because Goku's
and
so
that
good.
Is so powerful.
Goku can ride the Nimbus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for him, not lying is just speaking the truth.
Right. His spirit is pure.
Which is to say that his eyes
and
are so wide open that he
is
recognizes the way that things are.
That is what it means when characters say their spirit is pure, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that brings us neatly to the end. So we're going to wrap up here. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, give us a like, give a comment if you disagree. If you agree, let us know. All that good stuff. Remember, I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brok.
And this was Myth and Meaning, episode 10. The Truth is Good.